Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. We still have people arriving, so as people continue to arrive, we have a pretty big turnout today. So as people continue to arrive, we'll just give everyone a minute or two to show up, and when we get close to our numbers, then we'll begin in earnest. Thanks everyone for joining us. I'm realizing now that now that I have to wait a minute for everyone to join, that I should have prepared some jokes to keep all of you entertained. I know how to juggle, so maybe next time I do a webinar, I'll bring some juggling balls and put on some circus music in the background or something. All right, well, I don't want to keep everyone waiting. We have a lot to cover, and it looks like we have a pretty large group here already, so let me get started. Thank you so much for being here, and thanks in particular to the Business and Industry Association. Thanks so much, Jim Roach, for recognizing the need here, understanding that there was going to be the need for this kind of consulting and guidance, and for Laura and Jane and everyone there that helped pull this together very quickly and acted fast and brought us here today. So really appreciate everyone's efforts. My name is Ryan Robinson. I'm the Chief Service Officer at Mainstay Technologies. We are an IT services firm as well as an information security services firm, and we have been working over years now to move organizations into either partially or fully remote organizations. So this is something that we've been doing for some time, but the world is changing rapidly, and that's speeding up, of course, the evolution here, and speeding up the demand for organizations to be able to pivot. And you know, we still don't know what's coming. There could be more quarantine demands that are put upon us, and there may be even a greater level of remote work that needs to happen still. So let me just give a couple quick rules of the road here as we're doing this webinar. You know, given the nature of the webinar format, what I'm going to do is walk through this presentation, and then we'll wait to answer questions until the end. When I do in-person trainings, I'm a big fan of doing questions as we go, but just a different kind of format will work better that way. However, what I would request is, instead of you waiting to the end to write all of your questions, I would write them as you go, as you're thinking of them, and that usually helps improve the nuances in the quality of the questions if you keep them as you go. Also, no need to take notes or be stressed about taking notes. Anyone who requests the notes from me afterwards, you can just email me at rrobinson@mstech.com, which my email address will be on the final slide, and I'd be happy to send you more detailed notes. So no stress there. And the philosophy for this webinar is that I want to give you a lot of information, but then also give you the notes so that you can review anything you missed on the first pass. And then, of course, we're happy to consult with any individuals or any organizations that are seeking to integrate these elements into your organization over the coming days and weeks. So want to give you a lot of actionable and practical steps so that you can immediately put into practice the principles that we're talking about today. So we are in a very interesting situation, are we not? We are in a situation where we need to adapt fast. The coronavirus has changed the market dramatically in only a matter of days. And for those of us in New Hampshire, you know, it was really essentially overnight, quite literally. I mean, New Hampshire, we had the announcement from Governor Sununu that New Hampshire schools were closing on Sunday, late Sunday. And, you know, essentially immediately people had to figure out, okay, how am I going to handle daycare, and how am I going to do this? And so many people all across the state have had to move to either a partially remote or a fully remote work situation overnight. Now, the good news is the internet. The good news is that the market and technology has been step by step moving towards enabling a remote workforce for many years. With the proliferation of mobile devices, cloud-hosted infrastructure, cloud-hosted applications, and increased internet bandwidth, we are actually well poised as a society to be able to go into these kind of lockdown modes and be able to work substantially remotely. I mean, where would we be if this were to have happened in the 1980s, right? Now, the challenge, though, there's a few, is that we weren't there yet. While there was a lot of progress being made, we were still really, years away from being fully remote ready for many organizations. Changes in business, even when there's rapid developments of technology, still happen iteratively over time. And organizations, even from a cultural change perspective, only have so much internal bandwidth to change and to develop their processes and workflows and how they are functioning and how employees are living their day-to-day lives. And so it's not like we were all ready for this immediately. And so there's going to have to be many organizations that have to pivot pretty dramatically very quickly. There's also the challenge that many organizations just can't be fully remote. You think of the manufacturing companies that I know are represented here today, or construction companies. Many organizations just have physical integration written into the fabric of their industry. And even the companies, professional services firms and others that may be able to be fully remote or partially remote, even they may lack the proper remote access tools, from VPN to laptops. They may not have the necessary cloud-hosted, accessible anywhere infrastructure, applications and data to be able to work remotely that quickly. They may not have the virtual communication tools in place, or maybe they have them, but their team are not trained on them effectively. Maybe they don't have the proper security layers and protocols to be able to do that. And maybe they still have not had the cultural buy-in as well. I want to make a couple quick notes on cultural buy-in. There are very legitimate reasons for people to be concerned about their staff going to partially, mostly or fully remote structures. I mean, there's social and relational concerns with that. I mean, human beings are physical, embodied creatures, and we function best when we are with people, right? Even the introverts amongst us, even they are the same way, maybe to a lesser extent, but all of us need that kind of human interaction. There's the challenges with company culture and being able to develop a great company culture when people are not together. There's the work accountability concerns, holding people accountable for their jobs when you can't see them. And then there's just many other practical considerations, from shipping and receiving to many other things that make being a fully remote workforce very, very challenging. However, I think the situation that we find ourselves in gives us ultimately no choice but to adapt. I mean, just like in nature, we really have three options. When the meteor hits, it's like you go extinct is your first option. Not a good option. You adapt very slowly. Maybe that'll make it so you don't go extinct, but there's going to be a lot of negative consequences to that. Or you adapt fast. And essentially, for all of us, if we want to continue to compete in the market, if we want to continue to provide gainful employment for our teams, we're going to have to speed up the evolution of our businesses rapidly. And then, secondly, with this, I think we all need to realize that the world isn't going back to the way it was 2 weeks ago. Even if a miracle cure was found and we could all leave our homes and go just back to work and all of that, the world has already changed. It's easy to assume that we could just go back. But look, organizations aren't going to come back from this the same. Our culture is not going to be the same after this. Our spending habits are going to be different, especially in the near term. Our team's expectations for things like remote flexibility aren't going to be the same. If we're in this for weeks and people start to develop habits and workflows around working from home, and even though they may rejoice when it's not required, there's likely going to be long-term changes that are expected in our culture and in our business cultures from this. So in other words, if you're thinking, okay, well, I'm getting on this webinar today for a temporary, like I want to figure out how to get through the next few weeks or the next few months. Well, I think it's better to think, no, we're in this for the long haul, and this is about surviving and really integrating these tools and workflows into our organizations that will help us thrive, not just today while we're in this outbreak, but in the days, weeks, and months to come as well. All right, so let's talk through the overarching strategies of the playbook that I think we all need to be playing by in order to make it through all this. There's really 4 key areas, 4 key elements. First is having proper technology. So this includes cloud-hosted infrastructure and applications. It includes remote-ready devices. It includes proper connectivity and remote access. It includes necessary monitors and peripheral devices and all the other things we need to have to be able to work. We need to think about phone systems, right? We need to think about also virtual communication tools in this process as well. So having the proper technology is going to be critical. Then, in addition to the proper technology, we have to have the proper security layers that surround our people and our processes and our technology. So we're going to talk about security layers and workflows. Then we have to have the right cultural intentionality. The cultures within our companies are going to continue to evolve and grow, and we can't stop culture from being created. The only thing we can do is to be intentional about it so that we end up with positive company cultures and positive lives for our team members. And then lastly, ongoing adaptation. As we continue to work through these steps, our playbook has to continually evolve and change and adapt. And many of you on this call I know know a lot about lean manufacturing, and you know all about this. You know, you have to build, you get feedback, you adjust, and then you rebuild. And that's what we're going to have to do. We're all there's obviously some of the work, the groundwork has been done in many organizations to make this shift. And some of you may be almost fully there already. Some of you may be far away. But for all of us, this is a new world, and we're going to have to learn on the fly. And so being able to adapt fast is going to be a key skill that we're going to have to develop even more. All right, so for proper technology, the first play in our playbook. So for on-site technology, you know, for technology infrastructure historically, we've seen, you know, your office technology environment typically is made up of a number of key elements. And those key elements include your server environment, which is where your applications and your data are hosted and where additional services, technical services are performed by those servers. It includes your applications, the software programs that you need to ensure that you can manage the data and the workflows necessary to meet the needs of your team and the needs of your customers. Then there's the individual endpoints, like the devices, the computers, tablets, smartphones, etc., that you need in order to access those applications and data. Then you have the network environment. This is the equipment necessary to move the data from those servers to the endpoints, as well as from the internet safely to those endpoints. So this would include your firewall, switches, wireless, cabling, etc. Then you've got the monitor, you know, your screens, your computer monitors, and peripheral devices, including docking stations, computer screens, printers, copiers, scanners, keyboards and mice, etc. Then you have phones, you know, our verbal communication tool inside and outside the organization. Then you have the virtual communication tools that many of us have been using for many years, some more than others. You know, the communication methods such as video conferencing, instant messaging, etc. So what we have to do in this new world is that we have to make sure that all of these are transferred to a remote enabled structure. So the server environment needs to turn into cloud servers or serverless. The applications need to turn into hosted applications. Endpoints need to be made turned into mobile-friendly endpoints. Our network environments, secure network environments, need to turn into secure home environments. Our monitors and devices, we need to bring those home, and that's going to change whether we use them at all and how we use them. And our phone systems need to change now that we don't have these physical office spaces. And we need to utilize these virtual communication tools much more effectively as well. So let's take each one in their turn. First, let's talk about servers. So servers, remember, are where basically stuff lives. That's what a server is. A server is ultimately like a big computer that has a different kind of operating system that offers hosting and additional services, which is where it gets the name server. Now, if you have a server at your local organization right now and it's living in a server room out back, well, you're going to have two options. Essentially, option one is going to move to cloud-hosted infrastructure, where you quote-unquote lift and shift that local infrastructure up into a cloud-hosted platform. Or you can put yourself in a situation where you could remove the requirements to have those servers altogether by outsourcing application hosting or the other services that your servers are providing for you. So for the first option, moving to cloud-hosted infrastructure, this is often referred to as infrastructure as a service, or IaaS. Now, if you do this, there's two options that your organization has. Option one is moving to a private cloud. Option two is moving to a public cloud. Private cloud are where you move your servers that you have in a physical box living in an office, and you move those servers up into physical boxes that live in data centers. So rack space may be a familiar term for some of you. That's a private cloud hosting platform and option. Essentially, for a brief definition of the cloud. So, the cloud is one of those terms that gets used so often that it can be easy to forget what it actually means. All the cloud is it just means that instead of having your data and applications living in local hardware, local physical hardware, you move it into physical hardware in data centers, and then you pull that data and pull those applications, pull those resources from the internet. So the private cloud allows you to put your local servers in privately hosted data centers, such as Rackspace, and there's others out there. Now, the public cloud is also another option, and for my money, the better option. So the public cloud would consist of the three major players in the public cloud are Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. And so Microsoft has what they call their Azure platform, and that's their moniker for their cloud-hosted infrastructure. Amazon has their Amazon Web Services, or AWS, and then Google has the Google Cloud. The public cloud tends to be less expensive, easier to manage, greater levels of redundancy. Now, there are exceptions to every rule, and there are times where the private cloud can make more sense, especially if you have internal IT with a greater need for additional levels of management and so on. But one quick note, though, is if you're working with your IT provider and you've heard them talk about the private cloud, or you've heard them say that your servers are in the cloud, it's really worth digging into that and asking them, one, is it in a private cloud environment, or is it a public cloud, and just hear what their answer is for that. And then if they say it's in a private cloud, make sure you dig in to ensure that what they mean by that is that it's in a data center. Because sometimes people will say, oh yeah, we have we're hosting your servers, and what you don't realize is the IT company is hosting them in a server in their own physical office building or something. But that is not the same value and quality as it would be if you had it in an actual data center with all the redundancies and security protocols and all of that. So that's option one, is moving to infrastructure as a service. Option two is, again, removing the need for those servers altogether by outsourcing the application hosting or other services to either web-based applications or other cloud services. So some examples of this. So for applications, let's say you use QuickBooks. And QuickBooks is currently hosted on your server or maybe on a desktop machine that's shared out to a few different people. You could potentially move to QuickBooks Online. Now, you need to recognize with QuickBooks in particular that there are some functionality differences in QuickBooks, and some people are not a fan of it. I've talked to multiple clients, though, that actually prefer QuickBooks Online to the desktop version. You still have to make wise decisions about which applications you can move there and how quickly, but QuickBooks is an example. Let's say you're a nonprofit and you use Blackbaud, for instance, for some of your CRM requirements or financial management, Razor's Edge, that kind of thing. You can move to their NXT platform, which is their hosted platform. So those are just some examples. You know, there over the years, most vendors, most software vendors have moved to some sort of option for a hosted platform, but now with these changes, we're going to see that speed up even more rapidly. File hosting is another thing you utilize typically for a server. So how would you offload that? Well, you can utilize Microsoft OneDrive, for example, and or SharePoint, Microsoft SharePoint, to manage your files. And then they are living in Microsoft's data centers. They're cloud accessible anywhere. Same option for Dropbox for Business. You can use Dropbox. I would not recommend using personal Dropbox for quite a few security reasons, but Dropbox for Business has different plans, and you can then eliminate your need for your local file server. Same thing for ShareFile. So your CPA firm, attorneys, a lot of professional services firms like to use ShareFile because of its ease of external sharing, maintaining security. But one benefit of Microsoft's OneDrive platform is that you're likely already paying for the licensing, and so it can be less costly than the other platforms. Email is another thing you're going to want to offshore. Many organizations already moved to, say, Microsoft's Office 365 platform. Office 365, depending on the plan you're referring to, is free for nonprofits, so it's very attractive. Google Apps is another option for that. Google tends to appeal and cater much more to individuals, though, or organizations in education. If you're in the business world, either as a nonprofit or a business, generally speaking, the Microsoft platform is going to be the more appropriate for you. And then even account management. For those who are on the call who may be a little bit more technically sophisticated, you may have the question of, well, how do we manage all of our accounts if we don't have what's called a domain controller, which you typically have in a local server environment? Well, how do you manage that? Well, there are a number of tools, including Microsoft has a tool called Azure AD, that can be leveraged, as well as there's other mobile device management or MDM platforms that can be integrated in with that as well, that can do an incredible job of maintaining security over individual accounts, ensuring the right kinds of passwords are required, and so on. So there are many organizations that we support at Mainstay that are in serverless environments, and some of them are even larger organizations, and yet they're able to offload all of these resources into cloud-based applications or services that eliminate the need for those local or even privately hosted or publicly hosted server environments. All right, so let's talk about endpoints. Once you know where everything lives, you still have to access it, right? Now, endpoints need to be, in today's day and age, much more mobile friendly. And in a word, this means the move from desktop to laptops. What I recommend for you to do is to work with your IT partner to ensure that laptops have a few key elements. One, they should be business class. Business class laptops have much more solid chassis, so they're more durable and last longer. They have proper ports, so depending on what your needs are for multiple monitors or additional USB drives or additional peripheral devices. They also typically will have no adware or bloatware that you'll find if you go and buy machines down at Best Buy or Staples. Make sure, secondly, that you have proper warranties. 3-year warranties are standard. You know, you think this is in the hands of your team, this is their number one tool. And you would never want, you know, especially again, if you're in front of your computer most of the day, that laptop is going to be as important as the hammer is to the carpenter, right? And so making sure that you've got good warranties, that you can get them back up and running. And, you know, many organizations have relied on spare machines in the past, but it may be less, you know, it may be more difficult in coming days, weeks, and months for people to just be able to run to the office and grab a spare machine, especially for those of you who are already in, you know, where you're spread out geographically all over the place. And so having that next day pro support for your laptops will be really important. You want to also make sure you work with IT to ensure that those laptops have appropriate resources. You know, we typically recommend that an organization has 2 or 3 different standard machines, so that as new employees start, or you have to transfer computers, that you really know, okay, here's what this employee is going to need, and maybe you have some engineers that need a higher grade, and so you will have a second standard, and that way you can keep laptops in stock more effectively. You can work with IT to ensure that their stock, the machines that they have in stock are aligned with your standard machines, which will get those laptops rolled out to you more effectively and more quickly. And then lastly on that, ensure that you do have some spare machines. The industry standard is that you should have 3 to 5% of your computer fleet as backups. So in other words, if you have 100 computers in your organization, you should have at any given time 3 to 5 spare machines that in a moment's notice could be shipped to a remote person, could be picked up by a remote person to keep them up and running. Now, the irony in me recommending all of this and talking about these endpoints needing to be mobile friendly and the move to laptops is that we are in a bad situation that just got worse, in the sense that currently demand is high for laptops for this reason, right? Because people are needing to work from home, and you know, many have desktops that live at their office. But in combined with that, you know, demand is already high and it would make it more challenging to get these machines out quickly. But now our supply chains have been weakened all over the globe for organizations that either manufacture these machines or manufacture individual components with these machines. So you can put those two factors combined, and as you can imagine, we're seeing slowdowns already in being able to roll out these machines and get them ordered and quickly. So what do you do in that situation? You know, maybe you reached out to your IT company this week and said, hey, I need some computers, and you're getting some longer wait times than you can handle. Well, desperate times call for desperate measures. And so I want to give you some ideas, some flexible options here. First is you always have the option to bring home, right, your office desktop. So if you have a desktop machine, you can bring that home. However, what you need to realize is that many desktop machines don't have built-in wireless cards, which means, let's say your wireless router at your house is downstairs and your home office is upstairs. Well, you're going to have a long enough Ethernet cable to plug that desktop machine, bring it down the hall, and plug it into your router. So make sure that you're not just assuming that you're going to be able to bring that desktop machine home and be up and running. You're going to need to think about getting either from IT or from another source a long enough Ethernet cable, you know, Cat 5e or Cat 6e Ethernet cable to make sure that that can happen. You can also get a wireless card, an external wireless card to put in your desktop machine. The challenge with that is that, as you might imagine, those are very hard to get right now. And so it's difficult to order those and find them online. So your Ethernet cable might be your kind of stopgap measure until you can either get that laptop or get a wireless external card for your desktop. You know, another option, if you're in desperate times there, is you can use a non-business class machine from a retail store, right? You can go down to Best Buy and pick up a machine there. However, I want to give you some cautionary tips here. First, consult with IT. Make sure that those machines, don't just go grab one. Make sure that, first of all, they have the right specs, right? The right memory, the right processing power, and so on. Make sure that they have the right ports. So again, going back to earlier, you know, if you're using dual monitors and let's say, you know, multiple peripheral devices, and then you end up getting a machine that doesn't have the appropriate ports for that, let's say that it has an, you know, HDMI port, but not a display port, and that doesn't connect appropriately with your computer monitor. Well, that's not going to help you very much. So make sure that you know what ports you need. Ensure that you also have the right, that computer has the right video card. A lot of applications that are utilized require different levels of video card capabilities. And if you're, you know, if you're using CAD software, that's going to require a very different video card than if you're just using Excel. And so you want to make sure that you know what those standards are so that you don't go and buy the wrong machine. Look at the warranty length and coverage, as I referenced before, and also make sure you know what the return policy is, because there's still a chance you may end up getting the wrong machine. I want to make sure everyone can still hear me here. It'll look like that might have muted me. Forgive me for a second. All right. Hopefully, can everyone hear me?
Hey, Ryan, we can hear you.
All right, excellent. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah, you
So
were
we're
booted
still,
out and then booted back in.
excellent.
So I think you just need to share your screen.
All right. Is that working? All right. Are we good? Let me just
I
check in here
can't
and
see
make
your
sure.
slides. There we go. I think your slides are back up. Yep, we can see the slides. You're good to go.
All right, excellent. Sorry about that. Actually, funny enough, we're going to be talking about internet bandwidth challenges in a minute. And so that's if only that came right after the internet bandwidth bullet point. So I wanted to reference one other item here, which is that you should really not be utilizing any kind of, forgive me, I just want to make sure that I can be heard here. You should not be using any kind of home computer if you can at all avoid it. I mean, anything that you're accessing company resources should be monitored and managed by your IT company and should not be shared with anyone in your family or non-employees. So, you know, if you are in desperate times and have to use a home computer for whatever reason, you want to think about working with IT to get, you know, the appropriate, make sure that the appropriate antivirus software is on there and so on. And that should be your really only used in a drastic situation. All right. So let's go. Let's talk about the next section here, which is your network environment. So in your business network, there were security elements in place, and there were pieces to the puzzle there that are not going to just transfer one-to-one to your home office. And so the goal for any business leader joining us here today, or any staff members, is that the goal is to really enable the workforce to have access to all the data that they need, all the applications that they need. And so every remote team member in their home offices are going to need a couple key things. First is proper bandwidth for those staff members' needs. As a general rule of thumb, 50 meg download speed, if you have cable modem, should be sufficient. However, the caveat to that is it depends on the job role. Again, if you're doing much more high advanced, engineering work and so on, those speeds may need to be increased. And then we also need to realize that, in previous days, a few weeks ago, if you decided to work from home, most likely you didn't have one of your kids streaming Netflix in the other room, which sucks up a lot of that bandwidth. So there may be times where you need to increase your bandwidth levels if speeds are slowing down. And then each organization is going to have to make a decision about whether it's willing to do any kind of stipends for individual users that have to increase their personal costs in order to have these remote home offices. And I just want to note, I wish I would have noted this 5 minutes ago before that interruption, but note that currently there's a widespread concern about the infrastructure capability of many internet service providers. So, with the combination of employees working on home networks from cable internet that has never had to have that level of bandwidth pull, as well as all of these individual additional kids using devices and streaming and so on, there is concern that these internet service providers are not always fully ready for that. And so you may experience slowdowns or even shutdowns as a result of that, especially if we see quarantine measures become more extreme over the coming weeks. So the second thing, additional, once you get the bandwidth right, you need to ensure secure remote access. So there are really 3 layers of remote access that you'd be thinking of. At the top level is sort of the most ideal. At the bottom level is the least ideal. Let me walk through each of those 3. So for the first level of secure remote access would be if you were in a dynamic where all the applications and services were able to be cloud hosted and anything was able to be remotely accessed via the internet, no matter where someone was, home, work, vacation, whatever. In that kind of dynamic, you don't need to have advanced remote access technologies put in place, because all you have to have is an internet connection, and you'll be able to, through a web browser or through just the data that's being loaded into individual applications, be able to access all that you need. And then in those instances, the security really shifts to policies and workflows that we'll talk about in a little bit. If, however, so that's the most ideal. If, however, you still need servers either locally hosted or up in the private cloud or the public cloud, then you'll need to utilize either a VPN solution or remote desktop services. Well, actually, let me talk about the VPN first. So VPN would be for users that need access to data, applications, or services from those servers, but need a private tunnel, which is what VPN provides, a private tunnel accessing those resources. So when you log into your VPN client, essentially what you're doing is you are joining into a line that's direct from that server to your individual computer. And it's surrounding that line with security protocols that will ensure that that data is brought to you, is encrypted in transit. The key, however, many of you are probably using VPN right now. However, I want to encourage you that if you are not using VPN along with some sort of multi-factor authentication in order to log in, that's problematic and is something that you should look into right away. So multi-factor authentication, for those of you who are not familiar with that term, it means that there are, for most applications and data, there's at least one form of authentication we need to put in order to receive that data back. Most of the time, it's a password. That is a single factor, you could say, or a single form of authentication. And it's a form of authentication, it's something that we know. The problem with a password is that if it's something that you know, that means it's also something that could be guessed. It's something that could be stolen from you through a social engineering trick where someone actually convinces you to give it to them because maybe they sent you a phishing email and convinced you that you need to put in your Office 365 credentials in, and you end up giving away your password. Or it can be hashed or cracked using cracking tools that people can find for free on the internet. So what we all need, especially when we are accessing these sensitive resources, company resources, and potentially client data, is we need a second or even tertiary forms of or factors of authentication. So that should include something that you either physically have or something that you physically are. So one of the most common examples of two-factor authentication is if when you log into an account, you not only have to put your password in, but you also have to put in a secondary code that was sent to your cell phone. Well, that means that in order for someone to get into that account, they would have not only had to crack your password, but they would have had to have taken your actual physical phone as well. So you can see how much more significant the protection is in that scenario. So if you're using VPN, you should also be utilizing multi-factor authentication when you log into that VPN client. Now, the third option is using what's called remote desktop services. Remote desktop services are for users that need to connect to like an individual computer. Let's say you have a computer at your office and you are simply utilizing a computer at your home, but then going and connecting remotely to that computer as though you are basically controlling that computer and its resources remotely. There are plenty of examples of really solid remote desktop services. LogMeIn is the name of one that probably many of you have heard of. There's another one called Screen Connect. It's also good. That is a secure format. One of the challenges with remote desktop services is it tends to be more of a bandwidth and resource hog. And so if you have bandwidth concerns already, that may be a bit of a challenge. And it's not just from a workflow perspective, it tends to be more clunky, less user-friendly. So it's the least ideal of the options. But either way, if you use remote desktop services, that also should be layered with multi-factor authentication. That is critical. So again, two things: make sure you ensure proper bandwidth, and then ensure proper and secure remote access. Okay, let's talk about monitors and peripheral devices. In order to do the work that we need to do, we can't just have these computer boxes, right? We also need to have other tools that are connected to them. The first I want to talk about is docking stations. Docking stations, many of you, when you hear the term docking stations, you might imagine like a tray, and this is what they used to be. You might imagine a tray that you put your laptop on top of. Maybe there's like a spinny fan at the bottom of that tray, and maybe there's some ports that are connected to that. That is not the more common docking stations, the modern docking stations that we see now. Now what you're going to see is something similar to if you look at your presentation slide there, at the bottom right of the monitor, you can see a little black and silver box. That's what docking stations nowadays look like. They include multiple ports for multiple monitors. So a good docking station will have various ports for HDMI cables and VGA cables and DisplayPort cables, so that no matter what kinds of monitor you have, you can plug it in to that docking station, and that will connect appropriately to your laptop. They'll often have additional like USB ports or USB-C ports as well. And the beauty of the docking station as well is that with a single cord coming from the docking station, you can plug a single cord into your laptop, depending on the kind of the model of laptop that you have and the model of docking station that you have. And that can also provide power to the laptop. So in other words, in one cord, you will be able to immediately connect all of your additional monitors, any peripheral devices that require additional USB connectors, and get power all in one fell swoop. Docking stations typically cost somewhere around $150 a piece. And for a home office, especially if you are going to ever need to go between a physical office and a home office, or you're going to be on the road, having a docking station is so great because it means you can just take your laptop, plug it in with one cord, and you are up and running. Additional computer screens is a second one here to think of. A Microsoft study that was performed showed that users can have a 10 to 49% efficiency increase with a dual monitor. Isn't that a crazy stat? And that's a wide range, right? 10 to 49%. And that range is based on how much time someone sits at their computer every day, and then how many individual applications they are accessing at any given point. So if you're someone, or you have a lot of people on your team who are looking at email and Excel documents and line of business applications and stuff, all of that at the same time, then having multiple monitors are great. And if you have a single monitor right now and you can move that to a dual monitor, or if you have a dual monitor and you want to move that to triple monitors, I have 4 monitors myself, and I'll tell you, I don't think I could live without it at this point. Monitors cost about $150 a piece, and when you think about the cost of a staff member between salary and benefits, that's really pennies in comparison to get that level of an efficiency percentage increase. Printers, copiers, and scanners. So these are needed for certain job functions, but I want to encourage you that I said earlier that we are having to adapt fast, right? And a lot of organizations and individuals within organizations have pushed back on getting rid of, let's say, their local copier or the local printer that's been on their desk. Well, this is, for those of you who have been trying to push on that and have had no success, this is your chance. I mean, this is your opportunity to move to really a fully paperless environment, and to move these employees much quicker than it might have been easy to in past times. Now, if an employee still needs those devices, printers, copiers, and scanners, to perform their job role, what I'd strongly recommend is that you don't skimp on cost. You're going to spend more wasted time, technical support, IT, costs, paper, frustration, ink, you name it, having cheap peripheral devices. And if someone has that job function If it's critical enough to their job function that they can't go paperless and they really need it, then it probably is critical enough to spend a couple $100 extra to make sure that they've got the right equipment in place. Lastly, keyboards and mice. You know, human beings are physical creatures, and the quality of the keyboard and mouse matters. What we are physically having our hands all day matters. And if you have people that are working on, you know, those flat keyboards and flat keyboards and mice that are very small, you may want to consider looking at ergonomic keyboards and mice. Ergonomic keyboards have a slight incline at the top so that your wrists are able to be held at a more natural, comfortable level. There are ergonomic mice as well that are a little bit larger or shaped differently to more appropriately fit the contours of a person's hand. And I'm a big fan of the gel wrist pads on mouse pads as well. You've probably seen those. If you're sitting at your desk for a long amount of time, it's amazing how much less painful it is at the end of the day if your hand has been sitting on your wrist has been sitting on a gel pad instead of just direct on the surface of the table or the desk. Okay, let's talk about communication tools. I imagine that a lot of you came to this webinar wanting to learn more about this. Do me one favor and let me take a sip of water. This is the problem of not allowing questions as you go, right? You don't have the opportunity to take drinks. All right, so communication tools. Communication tools we need to think of in a number of different categories, okay? First, when you think about phones. So historically, and phones are, for almost any organization, phones are a critical part of the infrastructure. You know, phones have evolved over the years from those old copper lines to on-premise digital phone systems to, you know, more recently voice over IP systems, which probably many of you have, to new, what are called unified communication platforms. If you want to move to a mostly or fully remote workforce, you're going to need to live in one of those two last categories. You're going to need to either have a hosted voice over IP phone system or a unified communications platform. So a cloud-hosted VoIP platform means that you're getting the hosting done. So for your phone system itself is hosted by a vendor, whether that's Fairpoint or Comcast, whoever. They are the ones hosting the phone system as opposed to it being hosted locally at one of your offices. And they're also providing the service to be able to do that. One of the big advantages of a cloud-hosted VoIP system is that if you need to have physical phones still, let's say you have a workforce that just really would hate to utilize, you know, headsets like the one I'm wearing and really want to be able to pick up a physical phone, if you already have a hosted VoIP system, you may be able to actually take the physical phones at the office and simply unplug them, bring them home and plug them back in and seamlessly utilize those. The other option, if you have a cloud-hosted VoIP system, and this is the preferable one, is to switch to what are called soft phones. Soft phones are not the physical hard phones that are just softer, you know, with different physical properties. No, soft phones are when you're using a software application as your phone. So instead of that physical phone that has numbers you can dial in, you have an application that has numbers that you can dial in, a keypad that you can dial in using your mouse or using your keypad. And then you have all the same controls, or many of the same controls you would have on a physical phone, but you're just utilizing software to make it happen anyway. And if you have a cloud-hosted VoIP solution, then you'll have that option of having a soft phone. The one note on this is that if you move to soft phones, then you will have to utilize headsets. The good news in this is that headsets, we have found over the years, are a daunting mental shift for people. You know, especially if you've been using physical phones for many years, it's a daunting mental shift, but an incredibly easy practical shift. Once someone uses one for 30 seconds almost, it's like they're ready to go. It's often much more comfortable. The sound quality is better, especially if you're using a physical phone where the physical phone doesn't have a headset connected, but you're actually using like the old school receiver that only goes on one ear. People actually love to get headsets once they have them in place. And it's necessary if you're going to utilize soft phones for cloud-hosted VoIP. So that's option one if you're going fully remote. Option two is you can utilize something called unified communications. Unified communications is basically where all of your communications, not just your phone, but even like instant messaging, screen sharing, video sharing, phones, etc., all live on either a single platform or in multiple platforms that are fully integrated together. So the best example of unified communications that we've seen to date is Microsoft Teams. Many organizations already have Teams licensing, at least at some level or another, which makes it attractive. And of course, if you are already in the Microsoft ecosphere because you utilize Office 365 for email hosting and use the Office suite a lot and so on, then Microsoft Teams can be an incredible option for you. Microsoft also recently announced, because of the coronavirus outbreak, that they're actually offering some of their plans for free for organizations for the next 6 months. So if you don't have Teams included in your licensing, you may be able to get that, and we can consult with anyone here to help determine how to make sure that that happens. The thing to note about moving to Teams or moving to unified communications for your phone system is this. Phone systems cannot be fully translated from your old phone system structure with all of your call trees developed and all of that overnight. It takes a little time to plan that out, to map that out, to implement it, and then to go live with it and to test it appropriately. However, the good news here is that there is a process for moving. Let's say that you are in a dire situation right now where you are needing to make this happen really quickly. Well, there is a process where, for instance, we could help you do kind of an immediate functional move where your phone number is redirected to Teams, and you get licenses to implement Teams just for the people who normally in your organization answer phones. And then Teams will give them the ability to actually transfer calls to individual cell phones at their home offices. So you can do sort of a quick down and dirty phone system migration. That's not the way you'll probably want to leave it long term, but we can make that happen for you in a much quicker turnaround time if you're in a situation where you're just desperate to move the phone system. The other good reality behind unified communications is that typically there's some real cost savings there. For both support and the service, the cost can go up for the headsets. That's the part that can be expensive if you really want a good quality headset. Okay, so that's phones. Now let's talk about video conferencing. Video conferencing is all the more critical when people are isolated, right? What I want to do is share with you 3 of sort of the major players for video conferencing tools. I want to talk about Microsoft Teams, Google Hangouts, and then Zoom. And I want to share pros and cons with you of each. In sum, though, all of these tools can be used for 2 large category things. Either 1, on-the-fly internal meetings, communication and collaboration. So when I say on-the-fly, meaning you can, 2 clicks of a mouse and you can be having a video chat or a phone chat with a team member, you're just on the fly without it being scheduled. Second thing that these tools can do for you is allow you to perform scheduled external meetings, communication and collaboration, even outside your organization. You do not necessarily, in these platforms, always have to be working with someone who has a license to those. Like, so for instance, let's say you utilize Teams. If you want to invite, let's say, a prospect to a video conference prospect call, they don't have to have Teams set up in order to join a Teams video meeting. They can go through a web browser, you can send them the invite, and they can join effectively through that method. So let's talk about each of these different platforms. So Microsoft Teams, we already talked about it a little bit. The pros of Teams are specifically for organizations that are already in the Microsoft ecosphere. So if you're already utilizing Microsoft licensing for a number of other services and applications, if you're already using Outlook for email and Office 365 for hosting, etc., if you're using SharePoint, all of these things all add to the reason to utilize Microsoft Teams, because now you are living within the same native category, which improves the quality of service, it improves efficiency, it creates less likelihood for technical gaps, etc. Teams also provides a lot of a lot of collaboration options. So in Teams, you can use it for pervasive chat or IM, pervasive IM. Pervasive means, or persistent, not pervasive. That would be less positive. Persistent chat means it's instant messaging where when you end the conversation, the conversation doesn't go away and you have to go and retrieve it from history, but instead it lives in where as soon as you pull up that chat with that person again, you'll see all of the history there. It provides screen sharing that you can do, video chat, phone system, or just phone only conferences, etc. Also, it integrates with Outlook really effectively. So with one click, let's say you're creating a calendar invite and you're inviting people within Outlook, one click of an option in there is you can turn that calendar invite into a Teams meeting, and it will automatically populate in the details of the calendar event. It'll populate potentially a phone number for people to call into, or a link that people can click onto in order to join the meeting. It can also replace your phone system, which is something that the other two options that I'm about to talk about cannot. Can replace your phone system altogether. Also, there's some great integration. If you utilize in your organization other applications like SurveyMonkey and Salesforce and MailChimp, Microsoft Teams has applications that it can integrate seamlessly into a lot of those applications. And also, you can invite a lot of people. There's a 250 person max for audio and video through Teams. But there's also another option where it's a 10,000 person max if you do what are called live events, which means that you're not collaborating with those 10,000 people, but you're broadcasting it out. But you can go up to 250 people to do that collaboration. So if you want to have an all staff meeting, an all hands meeting, and you have an organization that has even up to 250 people, you can have them join one of those kinds of meetings. The cons for Microsoft Teams are that it requires additional licensing for a lot of these external services. So if you want to do audio conferencing and have that be able to generate a phone number easily, or if you're using it as a phone system proper, you're going to have to bring on additional licensing costs. But in those cases, you would typically have had to pay extra money for those services anyway. Otherwise, Microsoft, of course, wouldn't be able to maintain that business model. So you're really more trading costs more than you'd think of adding costs on. Okay, so that's Microsoft Teams. Let's talk about Google Hangouts. So Google Hangouts, the pros for this, similar to Microsoft, it's if you're already in the Google ecosphere. If you're already utilizing Google Apps for business or Google Apps for education, then this is a great platform to utilize. It's included in Google Apps. It's free for schools. It's very user-friendly and intuitive. Even things are named well in the way that Google Hangouts works. So for instance, they have Hangouts Meet. They have two options: Hangouts Meet versus Hangouts Chat. Meet is for conferences and conference calls and meetings, where Chat is more like one-to-one kind of collaboration. And so there's a lot of those subtle. Google does a great job with providing a very user-friendly, intuitive interface, and they've done the same thing with chat. But again, if you're in the Microsoft ecosphere, most likely Google Hangouts is not the best place for you to be, and it also cannot turn into a fully unified communications platform, meaning it cannot become your phone system and replace your phone system the way Teams can. The last one I'll talk about here is Zoom. The pros of Zoom are that Zoom, almost like it doesn't matter which ecosphere you live in. You can create a Zoom account either as an individual or as a corporate entity very easily. It does not require like a Google Apps or a Microsoft, what they call tenant. And so any organization, sort of regardless of what ecosphere they live in, can utilize Zoom. And there's, as a result, a lot of flexibility in that. Zoom has also been an industry leader for a while, and as a result, they just have some leg ups in terms of interface, technology. They do a really great job with their overall performance. So they have effective technology for throttling like the amount of pixels, or depending on what the bandwidth requirements of the people utilizing the service at any given time are. So you often will have less lags, less hangups, that kind of thing. And they're also, if you do a lot of webinars, they're really better natively built for webinars. I mean, we're using Zoom for this webinar for that reason. The cons are just that they're not natively integrated in with Microsoft products or Google if you're utilizing those. And so there are abilities, but they're not native. And so whenever you have non-native integrations, it just doesn't work as seamlessly. And again, it cannot replace your phone system. Now, I want to give you a sort of bonus tip here related to voice email. So I know for me, a lot of times I'm in a situation where I want to reach out and I want to connect with someone verbally, but I'm not in a situation where, but it may be that connecting with them verbally is not going to be possible in a live sense, meaning I can't just call them because they're not going to be available when I am available at the same time. And in those situations, normally say, okay, well, I'll send an email. Well, sometimes emails might take longer to type up and to format, and sometimes it's just less. You want that human touch that can come with a voice message. So in the past, it's like, well, what do? You maybe send you call them and then they don't answer, and then you leave a voice mail or something like that. But people hate checking their voicemail, for one. I'm guilty of that myself. And also, there's not a bunch of capabilities that this tool I'm about to share with you has. So what I want to share with you is something called Voxer. It's an application. It's a mobile, and it's primarily a mobile app, but it can be used for desktop as well. And what it allows you to do is send voice messages either in a one-on-one setting or in a group setting. So you can create a group chat and send voice messages to a bunch of different people. And it's not like visual voicemail, because you don't have to call anyone in order to send the message, and then maybe they pick up or maybe they don't pick up. You can record messages for up to 15 minutes with Voxer, and then when you receive a message, you can speed up the playback up to 4x. So maybe there's some people that will leave you messages and they draw out their sentences, and you want to speed that up, you're able to do that. So that can be a big efficiency booster, especially if you get a 15-minute message, right? These are perfect for when you want to have a conversation, but your just schedules aren't in line. So you just search the App Store for Voxer. The free version is more than suitable for most organizations. That's what I used for years. I use the paid version now because it gives you additional options, but I really strongly encourage all of you to consider utilizing Voxer. You can also, some of you may be thinking, well, can't you just voice text using iPhone? Isn't that kind of the same thing? It's similar, but that only tends to work with, that only works with iPhone users or other iPhone users. So if someone has a Samsung or whatever, that wouldn't work. And it's mobile only as well, whereas in Voxer, you could actually open up a desktop app to listen to your messages or to send them. All right, so that's helpful for the communication tools. So let's talk about security layers and workflows. So we have multiple security threats all converging at the same time right now. We have a dynamic where organizations are having to rapidly change, and so are playing much more fast and loose with security. And that's a natural tendency, but it's unfortunately not a good tendency. Additionally, individual users are much more likely to fall for social engineering scams and tricks when they're navigating a new environment, navigating through change, and your users are your number one risk, so that's concerning. Home networks, as we talked about before, typically don't have the same security layers as business networks. And of course, adding to the problem is that the threat actors, the hackers out there, know all of this and are having open season right now. So probably many of you have seen some major hacks occurring, major breaches occurring over the last week because hacking organizations and individual hackers are taking advantage of this situation. So it's very important that we implement some key safeguards. So I just want to walk through a couple with you here. So for some technical safeguards, talk about multi-factor authentication, secure email practices, and staff training. So we already talked a little bit about multi-factor authentication. So you know now what multi-factor authentication is, but I want to share with you where it should be applied. First step is multi-factor authentication should be applied on any bank accounts, business or personal, especially ones that have any kind of significant funds in them. So if you're, usually no one in your organization should be able to perform wire transfers or anything like that without having to go through multiple steps of authentication. Even logging into those accounts should require multi-factor authentication. And if your bank or your financial institution doesn't provide you a multi-factor authentication option, I would actually consider changing, or not even consider, urge you to consider changing that bank or financial institution, because that may indicate some other serious concerns about their own security best practices as an organization, let alone what it means for the risk that you're taking on. You should also layer multi-factor authentication on over email. We recently spoke with the New Hampshire Society of CPAs, for instance. They have a big problem where they have clients who will email them sensitive information that they never even asked for. And that can happen. And now, of course, that's living in your environment. Email is designed to be open. And so as a result of it, it becomes the place where we send and receive a lot of sensitive information. We store a lot of sensitive information. So it's important to have two-factor authentication. Sometimes people are concerned that if I have MFA on email, that it's going to be really cumbersome because they are in email all the time, opening and closing up email all the time. But the way that Microsoft does it, if you're utilizing Office 365, is they have something called modern authentication, which essentially means that you don't need to continually put in your secondary code or click the button on the Microsoft Authenticator app. It only would require you to enter that secondary form of authentication at the first setup. And if you were, let's say, on vacation or working from another computer and you want to access your email using Outlook.com through a web browser, then you would have to, for obvious reasons, because that's how the hackers would go there as well. But it's not cumbersome. It's not something you have to do all the time. Third, you should have multi-factor authentication on VPN or other remote access tools, as we had mentioned before. And then lastly, on anywhere you think sensitive data lives within your organization. So it could be certain line of business applications, certain file hosting services, you name it. Those, if it's sensitive data, then it should have multi-factor authentication surrounding it. Next, for technical safeguards, you want to have secure email best practices. You and your team need to be on high alert more than ever before for a number of things. First of all, anything personal that's being requested. If you get requests for information, for credentials, for account information, be suspicious. A red flag should go up in your mind, and you should not ignore that red flag. If you see emails coming in at strange times of day and night, maybe it's that you have some workaholic coworkers, but oftentimes it's because they're coming from other countries or being sent through web servers that are malicious. You want to look for fishy sender email addresses. If you see someone come in claiming to be your account rep from Microsoft and their email address is johndoe@microsoft.com with one of the O's missing, these are important things to look for clues for. You want to look for generic greetings, bad spelling and grammar. And you especially want to look for if an email comes in that has an attachment or a link that you're being encouraged, especially urgently, to open. Attachments and links are the #1 ability for malware to get installed onto your computer unwittingly to you. And so anytime a link is being asked to click, you should be very suspicious of that. And again, anytime it's urgent, especially, because that's how social engineers get people to do things that they would never do otherwise, is by making it seem like they need to and do it quickly. At this time of year, in March, April timeframe, there's a lot of scams that go around, emails that look like they're coming from the IRS. And then, of course, with this situation, there are emails coming around purporting to be the Red Cross or different health organizations or different organizations, nonprofits, purporting to seek to be requesting donations, the United Way or whatever, and you want to be really careful of that. So how do you handle that if you see those, or you people on your team? Well, first of all, a helpful thing to do is to, if you're suspicious about a sender email address, click the reply button, but don't send, because when you click the reply button, you'll be able to see in the sender, in your sender address, or excuse me, your recipient address, you'll be able to verify what that email address actually is. So if it's a spoofed email address, it will show up in its true form if you click reply. Also, hover over any links. And the bottom left hand of Outlook, it will show you what that link is actually going to. And so maybe there's an abbreviated form of that link in the body of the email, but you'll want to look and see where that's actually pointing to. Also, don't click on any links if you don't need to. So if you get a fundraiser request from the Granite State United Way, go over to the Granite State United Way and see if they're running that, making that request known publicly there. If you have been ordering toilet paper on Amazon and you get an email saying, track your order package, don't click that button in the email. Go over to Amazon, log in, and look at it, and track your order there. The one, by the way, this is counterintuitive, but the one link in an email you never want to click, you know what it is? It's the unsubscribe link, which is counterintuitive. A lot of people think that that's the best thing they could do for security, is to unsubscribe from a lot of the spam. But actually, if you were a hacker and you were going to compromise one single link on an email, which one would it be? It'd be the one that was most likely to get clicked. And that's exactly what the unsubscribe link is. Instead, you want to mark these messages as spam, which helps teach your spam filter which domain names it should be looking out for, which language it should be looking out for. That's much more effective and much more safe than clicking those unsubscribe links. And then lastly on this, in the olden days, you used to be able to, if you saw something fishy, you could open a new email, send it to the user who it purported to be from. Let's say it was your boss, and you could say, hey boss, did you actually send me this email? The problem is nowadays you can't do that because you don't know whether your boss's email account itself has been compromised, which means you're just going to receive back an email that says, yes, that was me. Please click that link again, or please do what I just asked you. Please go buy those gift cards or whatever. So now you must voice verify. Voice verify. The only way to ensure that it is the person is you need to call them and say, I got an email that looked like it was from you. This is what it said. Was this actually from you? All right, last piece here is staff training. Your users are your number one risk. And that was the case even when they were in the office. Now, as they're navigating change, as they're in new environments, they are even a greater level of risk to your organization. You can set up the highest level of security walls, technical, administrative, and physical, but if people leave open the doors or send sensitive data out the windows, then there's nothing you can do. So what we always recommend is that you have any current employees, they should be a part of a staff security awareness training program that repeats annually and continues to be evolving over time. The threats keep changing, so those annual trainings should look differently year over year. And that as you're bringing new employees on, that should be actually an integrated part of their onboarding process. So there's some mainstay runs. We have something called the User Security Training Platform that we help clients roll out, and that can be integrated. It's an online platform that we create custom that can be utilized as part of the onboarding process. And really that's what you want. You don't want the kind of, we're going to have the training, every May 14th, because you don't know whether users are going to be sick on May 14th or whatever, and make it so that they don't all get that training. Okay, so the ongoing adaptation piece will be short, so we'll go swiftly through this cultural intentionality. But this may be, in a certain respect, the most important thing we talk about today. The culture of your company, the culture of your nonprofit, culture of your school, whatever, is going to continue to develop in this process as people are working more from home, as more remote work occurs. The culture isn't going to stop evolving. The only question is, are you going to be intentional to help it be shaped positively and evolve in the best possible ways? When we don't have the ability anymore to shape the physical environment that people work in, when we lose that physical engagement, it means that we're going to have to be even more intentional than ever before. Cultural building in companies has always required a lot of intentionality, but it's going to be even more so now when we have lost that physical dynamic. And organizations, if you don't believe me, ask organizations that have been fully remote for years. this is just a reality of that kind of workforce. So some cultural recommendations for remote companies. I'm going to break these down into two categories. The first is check in with your team and hold them accountable, not just for their work product, but their work process. And then secondly, increase one-on-one and all team engagement. So for the first, check in with your team and hold them accountable. And this is the important part, not just for their work product, but for their work process. It's so easy when we can physically see people to focus on just simply their deliverables, what they're delivering to our clients, what they're delivering to the team, etc. But we need to be more intentional now about actually holding them accountable and encouraging them and guiding them and directing them on how they go about their work. So for instance, encourage your team to have a dedicated separate workspace at their home. It's very easy for people to wake up in the morning, grab their laptop, sit in bed and start checking email or to just go onto their living room couch and check their email. Maybe that's going to be less likely if they've got kids running around, but especially, for single folks or whatever, that is very common. That's not good for people emotionally, psychologically, or even physically. And so we want to encourage our teams to say, all right, this is a physical place you go and work. And so when that starts and when that ends. Another recommendation here is encourage your team to implement daily work routines as part of their work plan. It's not just children that thrive on routines and consistency. It's all of us. Even our health is deeply intertwined with things like circadian rhythms. And if we do not abide by appropriate circadian rhythms, or we change our schedule rapidly or change it and are inconsistent with our schedule, inconsistent in our go to bed times and our wake up times, that really has a detrimental effect on our health. And I know we're all in a place right now where we're all concerned even more than normal on the health of our employees. So really encourage them to implement daily work routines as part of the work plan. And then also we need to model this. And one of the main things that we need to model, I think, is proper, what I call work to home shifts, or vice versa, home to work shifts. In other words, when we are working fully or partially or mostly remote, the tendency is that life can turn into work and work can turn into life, and we can lose all sense of boundaries. And so we should be encouraging team members to do things like change their clothes when they start their workday. Get out of your pajamas and put on, your jeans even, or put on some dress pants and get into a different mental space. And then same when you're transitioning out. When you're done with work, take off those work pants and put the jeans on or whatever. We want to encourage our teams to have those kind of rhythms. And then, I think this is a danger for, all of us, I think, in business, especially in a dynamic where we can email and message people 24 hours a day. We need to model for our teams and be really careful if we're sending emails off hours to our teams or messaging them off hours. That was probably something that we've always needed to be concerned about, but even more so. And for some of you may realize that Outlook has a delay delivery button. You can open up an individual message, and even if, let's say, you have to jump on the computer at 8 p.m. and clean some things up and send some emails out, you can go on, and as you send those emails out, you can delay the delivery so that email to your team member doesn't go to them until 8 a.m. the next morning or something. Because as we email people at these off hours, we are building a culture. We're building a sense of expectation there about what we are assuming that they are going to deliver. And now more than ever, we really need these work to home shifts to be clean and clear, and home to work shifts to be clean and clear. So second, so that was related to checking in with your team and really modeling and focusing on their work process, not just the work product. But also we need to increase our one-on-one and all team engagement. Human beings are wired for connection, and so we're going to need, especially through this, we're going to need many more touch points, physical as best we can through video and so on. And so, if you have a quarterly all staff meeting, for instance, that you normally get together everyone in the same room, well, consider moving that to a monthly staff meeting if it has to be virtual, right? Or increase the frequency of your one-on-one rhythm meetings with your team members. If you meet with them once a month, meet with them now once a week, but maybe make those meetings shorter so that the time commitment still stays the same, but the touch points are happening more regularly. Utilize unified communication tools that we had talked about earlier to make that increased connectivity easier and more efficient. Here's another one, default to video rather than phone. I know for me, I never want to put people on the spot and put in and make it so it's like I request a video conference when it could be a phone conference. But, Teams and these other kind of video conference tools that we talked about really make it easy to utilize video. And we need to get more comfortable with utilizing video now more than ever. And so if you normally would have turned it into a phone call, make it a video call so that you can see each other's faces and have a deeper level of that connection. Last tool I'll mention is Microsoft has a tool called Yammer, which you could think of as sort of like a Facebook for business. And many organizations had tested, Yammer for a while and maybe didn't find that it was super helpful. But in the current climate, Yammer is a lot of more organizations are implementing it, and it just is a way of having more casual group engagement with your team instead of it always being about work and always being more formal. So lastly, ongoing adaptation. As I mentioned, a lot of organizations represented here are manufacturing companies, are very familiar with them. And manufacturing companies recognize that they have to go through a process, and many startups realize this as well, that you measure what you've built, you get feedback, 360 feedback, you learn then from the feedback that has been delivered, and then you iterate and change and develop as you go. We're all in a new world, Mainstay, we've been had a remote workforce for a long time, but we're way more remote now than we were a week ago. A lot of our clients, same situation. And so we're all learning how to navigate this new world. So this is let's just not assume that this is the end of the matter, what we talked about today. Let's stay in touch and let's keep learning from each other and how we can continue to iterate and rapidly shift. We don't want to be the slow adapters who are more likely to go extinct. We want to be the fast adapters. How Mainstay may be able to help in this? Well, we are a managed IT company, so we can be your IT department. This is one of those important times where organizations can just not have ineffectual IT. When times are good, it's not as challenging. But think of it, many of you have seen the unemployment numbers that we're starting to see massively skyrocket. People's jobs, the jobs of our teams are on the line, the jobs of people at our clients are on the line in all this. And your teams need appropriate tools, they need fast support. And it's not just, oh, well, we've had a partner for a long time and, we want to stay loyal and there's not enough it's not a big enough deal to make a shift. This is a much more serious circumstance that we've shifted to. So, Mainstay, we can help either provide IT services in one of two ways. We can either be your IT department if you're finding that your current provider is sort of too ineffectual in all this and can't guide and lead and direct you in these critical ways. Or if you have internal IT that just needs some support with individual projects or rolling out new desktops quickly, or just guidance and help in navigating these new waters, we can come along and buttress them and support them in this process. We're also a managed information security team. So those are the two divisions of our company. And so on the security side, we can help be your security and compliance team through this and ensure that the compliances that you're needing to live under can still be followed as you dramatically shift your workflows and how your company does business. We can do individual risk assessments compliance governance. We can do user security training, as we talked about before, and we can also develop policies and workflows to help you navigate these waters so that you can be really secure, just as you're needing to be really nimble and adapting to change. We can also do any of this in kind of a one-time, like doing individual audits or assessments. And of course, call anytime. I'm an email away. Our team, we love to consult with folks on these kinds of things. And for those of you, many of you are familiar with Mainstay already, but hopefully, and for those of you who are in that category, you know that we are not a sales-driven organization. We don't have any commission salespeople at Mainstay. What we're all about is providing really great consulting and really high value and letting the chips fall where they may. So you won't get any hardline sales pressure if you reach out to us for consulting. So I'd like to transition now to some questions. So for those of you who have been asking questions along the way, that's great. Or if you've been writing down questions and been waiting to post them, now is your time. Okay. All right. Here's a question, Caleb. Recently, we had a building get damaged due to an earthquake. Luckily, the power to the building didn't get cut, and I was able to log into our server and start copying the data to the closest data center with easy copy. Is there a faster way to move data/migrate data to the cloud? So that is a great question. It's one that probably, Caleb, we should take offline because there's a bunch of kind of technical nuance to that. It depends a lot on where you're migrating it to and what the type of data is, the amount of data, and what you have already for workflows. So that one might be a good one for us to connect with directly. All right. Someone asked for clarification on Voxer. So Voxer is V-O-X-E-R. So that's how you'd want to look that up if you are if you're wanting to download that application. All right. Any other questions? Happy to jump in. I know this is a weird format for asking questions, but for those of you who may have questions that you'd rather talk directly about with them, then feel free to send me a quick email. And so let me just close. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Let me just close with a couple things. First of all, we'll send out a request from attendees for feedback. Would really appreciate any feedback, positive or negative, about this presentation. What was valuable, what was not. As you can clearly see, we are responding to the situation, pivoting. We have a great foundation to build on, but we're all learning new things about the situation that we are in day by day. So we're going to be doing a lot more trainings on this. We've got a lot of requests recently from organizations asking to provide guidance and consulting on this. So we'd love your feedback. Additionally, please let the BIA know. Let Laura or Jane or Jim, anyone at the BIA, if you're connected with them, know about what other trainings you might be interested in, whether it be from Mainstay or other firms, because the BIA has been doing an excellent job thinking ahead on this and trying to provide value to their membership. And I know that they would appreciate any recommendations. And lastly, my email address can be found here, rrobinson@mstech.com. So please let me know if you are interested in getting the detailed notes of this. I'd be happy to send those off to you, and that may be a good tool for you to use as you go deeper in these topics. All right, well, thank you so much. Really appreciate everyone's time today and looking forward to staying connected. All right, take care, everybody.